Live from Djerber, this is the Locktoon Podcast. I'm Amy.
And I'm Mel.
We're rereading Harrow the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. Today we're covering all of Act 4, episodes 32 through 39, and the Epiparodos. Act 4 can be separated into 3 parts. Part 1 is a hopeful bit where Harrow encounters some of our favorite pals. We won't give it away. Part 2 is confessions, where some of the older lictors in the Mithraeum share some deep, dark history of the past. And we also get part 3, I had to give a fuck. Mel, that could have been your joke.
I know.
And it's just Ianthe being a dick in the present and in the past.
Well, Amy, before we get started, I'm wondering if you know what Palamity's favorite kind of tea is.
Is it Palamites?
Oh, that would have been funny. No, it's chamomile.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
All right.
All right, y'all. We have a big chunk to cover today. We are doing all of Act 4. So let's get into it. Chapter 32. This is 2 months before the Emperor's murder. We get an 8th house skull for Mercy, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
We are in the second person, and Harrow is sent to kill her 14th planet.
Yeah, she's really going through them.
She's going through them. This planet is particularly sad, not to be planetist, but it's very Earth-like, so feels pretty sad to murder. And also, at this point, no one has found Cytherea. Nothing much has changed since the threesome.
Yeah, I thought it was funny that Harrow said the total absence of appropriate shame made you suspect that this has happened before, and that made you want to give yourself a lobotomy, which is very ironic, given that she did literally give herself a lobotomy.
Right. I hope this doesn't become a pattern for Harrow, that every time she can't deal with something, she just lobotomizes herself. I wonder how many lobotomies one can give themselves before they don't make it.
I feel like a grand total of pretty much 0.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. So, Mercy and Harrow are on this planet together. But Mercy seems pretty nervous. She's kind of wringing her hands.
Yeah.
I love this. She's looking through her lashes when she spoke. I was trying to imagine what that looked like. Yeah. You all can't see Amy's face right now, but Amy's doing it real well. But she's pretty anxious. And we think that that's because she has maybe just visited with Blood of Eden. So we get that short story in the back of the book, As Yet Unsent, where Mercy does make an appearance and does some funky shit to Judith, which we'll talk about when we get to that short story. But pretty sure that Mercy is feeling anxious because she has just gotten in bed with the enemy once again.
My take is that As Yet Unsent happened quite a while before this. When she says, I'm going to go do the moonlit next door, what she's actually going to do is meet up with some BOE agents. But this is after As Yet Unsent. Because Judith in that couldn't walk. She was very injured and couldn't get out of bed. And now she's at least walking with crutches.
Right. Okay. Got it. Yeah, that timeline makes a lot more sense. We get a really clear explanation of what flipping a planet actually does to it. So in the past, we've heard that the planet dies slowly, but we get a little more detail here where life on the planet does slowly change from thalergetic beings to thanergetic mutants. So they're unable to reproduce. This kind of takes me back to our conversation, I don't know, maybe last episode or a few episodes ago, where we talked about if there's animal life on the 9 houses,
right,
and how folks get their food and stuff. And it would appear that on a thanergetic planet, there would not be animal life because they wouldn't be able to reproduce unless they were somehow preserved by God's magic.
Yeah, there has to be something with the 9 houses that allows them to have some sort of thalergy. There is life on the 9 houses, so I'm not sure what the mechanics is behind that, but there's got to be something because of the fish, famously.
Right, I know, the fish. The fish on the first house, which is preserved by God's magic, for sure.
Right, and then there's the roses and the farm on the 7th.
Right.
I think that the 9 houses are slightly different than a fully flipped planet. Somehow God has preserved some level, because also people can get pregnant. And
Right.
this says that they're Thanergy mutants that can't reproduce.
Right. We don't know the full details of the mechanics of all of that, but this was just another interesting detail as we continue to unfold how this universe works.
Right. Then we move on to chapter 33. We've got a 6th house skull. It's continuing in the second person. And it's a 6th house skull because Harrow runs into freaking Camilla Hecht. Like the best character. I mean, Camilla Hecht has to be top 2 best characters in this book.
There's so much great fan fiction out there where Camilla and Gideon are BFFs, and it's really cute.
Ugh. Have you been reading fan fiction?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh my God.
A little bit, I have. Some of them are really long, and it feels hard to read it on my phone, but yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been dabbling a little.
I'm so proud of you.
This is probably one of the most surprising chapters for me when I was reading this the first time. And it was also a huge relief of a chapter.
Yeah, I think at this point, things really pick up.
Yeah.
And then once we hit the next episode, so the 5th act, that forward is just fully climax.
Yep. I feel like here we're building, but it's a strong build.
Yes.
I love Harrow and Camilla's interaction where Harrow says, "I saw your corpse." And Camilla says, "Well, don't tell everyone or they'll want to see it too."
Yes.
Also in this encounter, Harrow is bleeding a lot.
Yes.
Just blood coming out of every orifice in her body. It's intense.
Yeah, because she set herself up to not be able to remember any of these people. And in her memory, Camilla is dead. So her brain is trying to deal with this disconnect. But thankfully for her, she does have a letter, one of these 24 letters or 22 letters that she has, that says, if you run into Camilla Hecht, give it to Camilla. And so she gives this letter to Camilla. Camilla reads it, says, okay, rips it up. And we don't actually know what it says. And Harrow's like, what did it say? And Camilla does say this line, but I do think actually the letter was much more complex than that. I think it basically explained to Camilla exactly what was happening.
Yeah. She did read it pretty quickly, but this obviously said something about not saying anything to Harrow about Gideon.
Right.
I think it's interesting that in this letter, Harrow's instructions to Camilla might be like, don't say anything about Gideon, but there is no letter for Harrow to open for herself when she encounters Camilla. And so it demonstrates a level of trust and respect for Camilla, trusting that Camilla will follow the instructions of the letter. With Ianthe, she had to do that extra little thing to Ianthe's jaw.
Right. Harrow does sort of subconsciously reach for Camilla with one of her constructs, and Camilla comes at it so hard and just destroys it. So Harrow's like, whoa, I just need to know that you're real. There's a bit where Harrow says, I am a lictor. I'm, Harrow the First. You have no chance against me. And Camilla says, not yet. Do you think that Camilla knows that the end goal is for her to achieve perfect lictorhood with Palamedes?
I think that Camilla knew everything that Palamedes knew back at Canaan House. I don't think there were any secrets between them. I don't know that they made a plan to become lictors necessarily, but there was a plan to figure out how to bring Pal back if he died.
Right.
And so her mission really is to bring him back. And I think that she probably can deduce that the only way to do that would be to achieve lictorhood because he doesn't have a body anymore.
Right. I also wonder, Harrow's like, you are here so far away from anything. How did you get here? And this question is never really answered, but I assume Mercymorn must have taken them through the river, right? There are no steelies out here.
Yeah, I mean, BOE has a steely, but they don't know how to use it, which is why they're keeping Judith hostage.
Right.
They think they can use her. But at this point, well, I don't know. If this happened after As Yet Unsent, they could have used Judith to use the steely.
So maybe Mercy Morn placed the stele out here because she would have had to place it. I think only lictors can place them.
I thought lictors placed obelisks.
Oh, maybe that's what it is.
I did some research because I was like, what the fuck is the stele? I like forget how this works. So I was on the internet. The stele is on a ship.
Right.
And obelisks are also another form of travel. I imagine you can use like a stele in combination with an obelisk. I don't fully understand. But if the timeline is such that this encounter here happened after Mercy Morn already did whatever she did to Judith,
right,
then BOE could have used the stele to get here. Alternatively, Mercy Morn helped them in some other way and met them on this planet at some point, right? Because in As Yet Unsent, it says they're on this planet that is Earth-like, and then they encounter Mercy Morn.
Oh, that's so interesting. I wonder actually if they've been camped out here or on a nearby planet the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Mercy brought them over a couple months into the timeline of this book, and they've been there.
Right.
I'm sure that this is going to be answered. Not sure, but I think this will probably be answered later.
I think this will be answered after it's confirmed that Camilla is real, because she smashes the shit out of Harrow's constructs. Camilla shares the real reason why she came looking for Harrow. And so she has this pouch around her neck, and she takes it off, and she pulls out a glued together fragment of a skull.
Right.
And claims that this is actually Palamides' skull and that his revenant is attached, and is asking Harrow to confirm that for her. Mm-hmm. This is a moment where you're like, wow, Cam is so dedicated to her BFF, pal.
Right.
Because the way that it's described is these are tiny, tiny, tiny fragments. I think the smallest one is no bigger than like a pinky nail.
Yes.
And so just a lot of work that went into putting together this tiny fragment of skull. And at first Harrow's like, it would be crazy for Pal to be attached to that skull at this point.
Right.
And Camilla's like, no, just confirm it for me. And I think she asks about the rest of his body. And Camilla says, the cohort took the rest of him away, and I don't know where they have put him.
Yeah, that's a Bible reference. That's a really kind of sad Bible reference, because that's this bit in the New Testament where Mary Magdalene, which is, one of Jesus's buds, comes to the tomb to say goodbye to him or mourn him, and he's not there. And she's like, what the hell? And these angels appear, and they're like, what's wrong? And she says, they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. And it's a bummer.
It's really sad.
But just like in the Bible story, Camilla will realize that Palamides is not really dead.
Palamides will rise
again in Camilla's body, weirdly. Another Bible thing / Christianity, Catholicism thing is it says Augustine had ducked you and Ianthe in the river to train you for this. And that's like major baptism vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Yeah.
It's almost as if this book has a Catholicism influence.
Yeah. And I was just starting to wonder about that.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll have to prove it, I guess.
Receipts.
More receipts. Oh, that's what we should rename this podcast. Locktomb Receipts.
We should. But Harrow does this for Camilla. She wades into the river holding this fragment of skull, and instead of entering the river as she would expect, Harrow ends up in a room, and Palamides is there.
Although she doesn't know him because she lobotomized her brain.
Right. She doesn't know him, but we know him, and we are filled with excitement and relief once again. He's so funny. God, I've missed Pal.
I know. It's a funny situation because basically he created a river bubble based on what he last saw before he died. The only thing in there that is different or weird is this one book called The Necromancer's Marriage Season.
I think that Kitharea was reading it.
Interesting.
Because she was always reading trashy novels in the first book.
Mel, you're so right. That's definitely what it is.
Yeah.
But it's just this really, really bad romance novel. And he kind of explains the plot to Harrow and then gives her a hug. And she's like, I don't know you.
He explains the plot to Harrow, and it's very reminiscent of when Ianthe explains to Harrow about the makeover trope from trashy romance novels. So we just get a lot of really good shit here. So funny.
I also love that in this book, it's just so queer. Like the final couple is two women, and I just love it. This is the world in the future, you know?
Yeah, hopefully our future world isn't as shitty, but as gay.
Yeah. Same level of gayness, no apocalypse. Necromancy, honestly, not super chill. It sounds pretty bad.
It sounds rough, yeah. There's a cool note here. I love how Tamsyn Muir keeps throwing us scraps around how these different mechanics work for entering the river. I had been wondering if one enters the river, how their clothes go with them. And here, that's actually answered in a roundabout way.
Right.
Where when Harrow first encounters Pal, she goes to reach for a letter, in her exoskeleton, and she can't, both because she never wrote one, because old Harrow really thought that Pal was dead, but also because they could not transfer when you did not know their contents. And so It's just telling us that in order for anything to enter the river with you, you have to know it. And I found that interesting.
Yeah. And this also proves, I think, that the notes and all of the things in the river bubble that Harrow's created are coming. Everything that Harrow doesn't really understand is coming from either the people who are in there or from Wake.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
we also get, and we won't go into the details of this, but a pretty interesting description for how Palamedes made his river bubble, which gives us some indication for maybe how Harrow made hers. And beyond that, Harrow shares with Pal that he's been dead for 8 months, and Pal kind of loses it.
Right. Yeah, because he's very confused. Obviously, time has been different for him, but he says that Camilla would have stayed near her if at all possible. So this makes me think that when Camilla was taken off of the first house by BOE, that it was not willingly at all, which makes sense.
Mm.
At the end of Gideon the Ninth, presumably Camilla is right next to Harrow. So at some point they separate, and it's in that moment that BOE takes Camilla.
Yeah, I want to believe that Cam ran to wherever Pal's body had exploded to try and retrieve as much of him as she could.
Oh my gosh, of course, because she would have had to have all of this before they picked her up.
Right.
Interesting. Also, this is where Palamedes finds out that Harrow Hark has become a lictor.
Yeah.
And he's like, that wasn't your plan. And she's like, it was always the plan. And then he says, tell me you did it correctly. Tell me you finished the work. You, out of everyone, could have worked out the end to the beginning I was starting to explicate. So Palamedes knows about true lictorhood.
Palamedes figured it out.
Dude, what a fucking badass.
I know. God. I'm whatever. I'm sad he's not in his body, that we won't see Pal the way that we always have, but I'm so glad he's alive.
I know.
He's horrified with Harrow when she says that she became a lictor, and she doesn't really know what he's talking about, and he says how God takes and takes and takes, which I feel is referenced somewhere else in these books, but I can't remember where. I feel like maybe Cytherea said something like that in the first book, but in any case, here we know that Pal has figured out true lictorhood, and
or at least figured out that it exists.
That it
exists. He doesn't quite know how.
Right.
So Palamedes and Camilla are the first people after God and Alecto to achieve true lictorhood ever. Except that Palamedes doesn't have a body.
Right.
But for all intents and purposes,
they're both alive.
They are able to achieve true lictorhood.
Yes.
Isn't that wild?
It is wild. And Pal's not that old.
No, he's a baby. Compared to us, geriatric millennials, he's like 22.
It's real. Well, babies can be smart.
The next bit is very, very illuminating because the sleeper from the river bubble of Harrow's making appears in the Pal river bubble. And Pal says, I can't change this at all, but you've brought something with you. And they are leaning against the door to keep it closed against the sleeper. And Pal says, you got to go. You brought this with you. I'm banking on it leaving when you leave. And I think they hit their heads together.
Yeah.
And Pal kind of like backs up and looks at Harrow in this really weird way. He smiles and he says, kill us twice, shame on God. And oh my gosh, the last lines of this chapter are so good. And it's the first time that Gideon ever refers to herself as the narrator.
Used first person.
She says, you never could have guessed that he had seen me.
Yeah.
I just had a friend who's reading this book text me the other day with this, like a screenshot of this line. And they were like, this better mean what I think it means.
I think we all felt that way. That's why I have named these first 3 chapters of this act Hope, because we finally fucking get some. However, you could interpret this to be Wake. If you were a real pessimist, you might think this is Wake. I think I was still cautious at this point to put all my eggs in one basket.
Oh, no.
I'm curious what you think about this. So we've talked about this line coming up a number of times throughout the book, and it's around being in a darkened corridor. And I think the body says something to Harrow once about, walking down a darkened corridor and needing her to turn around. And here, towards the end of this chapter, I'll read the whole quote because I actually think the whole thing is really well written.
It's so good.
But also just really important. So, you were, not for the first time, overwhelmed with the suspicion that you were standing in the middle of what you had thought to be scenery, only to reach out and discover that it was all so much flimsy. You were not a central lever within a mystery, but a bystander, watching a charlatan display a trick. Your eyes had followed a bright light of color, and you realized with a start that you ought to have been watching the other hand. You were standing in a darkened corridor, and you could not turn around. And then a brief explosion of light revealed to you that it wasn't a corridor at all, and it had never been dark.
That last line, though. But you were always too quick to mourn your own ignorance. You never could have guessed that he had seen me. Mel. Just a moment of silence for that line. I feel like we can't even say anything. I don't know what the darkened corridor means, if it's just a metaphor or if it's actually talking about the tomb in a weird way and like literally some sort of mind corridor. But regardless, it is also a metaphor for Harrow thinks that she doesn't have any information, but actually it's just her refusal to accept the information that's right at the periphery that is holding her back. And granted, Harrow has a plan, I think, about why and how she wants to preserve Gideon's soul. And it's not just because of grief, but she's standing in this darkened corridor of her own making, and she just can't see that actually the answers are right there.
Right. I love this metaphor because earlier in the book, when this comes up, the darkened corridor describes like you're following a path that you probably shouldn't go down or you're going to be lost. And you need to turn around and like face what you need to face.
Right.
And I just love that Tamsyn Muir rounded out the metaphor with that the corridor actually doesn't exist at all. It's so good.
I don't know if we've ever mentioned on this podcast that Tamsyn Muir is like a really good writer. Should we mention that?
I don't think I've ever shared that, but I guess now's the time.
Sorry, guys. I feel like we should have said this like episode 1. Incredible writer, Tamsyn Muir.
Incredible writer. So anyway, we get some hope at the end of chapter 34 that Gideon might be alive here in some way.
Yes.
And with that, we move into chapter 34. We have the second house skull. We are continuing in second person. And so this takes place right when Harrow exits Calamity's river bubble. And so now she is back on the planet. She wakes up not where she was before. She's actually laid out and near a shuttle that does not seem to have come from the 9 houses.
Right.
She does share with Camilla that Pal is still attached to the skull.
Right.
And, before she had left the river bubble, Palamedes had asked her to essentially turn whatever fragments that Camilla had into something that had movement.
Right. That articulates, which makes sense.
Right. So what Harrow does is turns it into a skeletal hand.
Right. And there are a couple of interesting bits in here. Harrow says, I could just turn it into a full skeleton. And Camilla says, no, that would get me in trouble. And I do find, I'm sure that we'll get more insight into this in Nona, but like Camilla's on Blood of Eden's side, but also is obviously sort of under their control in a way too. It's not like Camilla's in charge. I think Coronabeth might be soon, but I think it's also interesting because presumably now that Camilla has this hand, Palamedes is able to write out what he wants Camilla to do.
Right. And like, how the fuck does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where I'm like, Tamsyn Muir gives us everything we need to make it believable, but it doesn't need to be explained.
Yeah. Although most things are explained, but
Yeah. They might, it might be, but I also think that it definitely could not be, and that would be fine.
That would be fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then one of the best encounters we get. So we have just been hit with our favorite dudes, Camilla and Palamedes. We get a little hint that Gideon might be alive. And just when we think we've got all the hope we've needed, Harrow walks around the entrance of this shuttle and sees Coronabeth and Judith.
What the fuck?
And a picture of a stranger with red hair. Uh-huh. And your first read through, I thought, is this a picture of Gideon?
Oh my gosh, me too.
Because it's described as someone with red hair. Granted, the red hair is curly and shoulder length, which is not Gideon's hair, but still, it's just so well done to keep us on our toes. Like, we were like, is this Gideon? We couldn't have guessed that this was Wake at this point.
Right. I also think it's interesting. Harrow's like really afraid of it. It says that portrait frightened you more than anything that you had seen since becoming a lictor. It scared the irresolute piss from your body, yet you had never seen the face before in your life. I think that the most obvious reason for this is because she's being haunted by this person and something in her subconscious recognizes this person. But I also was wondering if it was because this person resembles Gideon.
Yeah. I think so. I think it could be both things for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So upon encountering Judith and Corona,
she has actually those 2 letters.
She has the 2 letters. She reads the one about Judith first, and it basically says to silence her and kill her if necessary.
I know, geez.
That's it. It's a really short note. And really aggressive. And that's exactly what Harrow does. She basically fuses Judith's jaw shut.
Yeah, Jesus.
And then we get a hilarious letter pertaining to Coronabeth Tridentarius.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's just a back and forth with PS, PPS, PPPS between Ianthe and Harrow.
And it's basically like, Harrow's instruction is to silence her so long as this causes her no significant pain. And the back and forth in different handwriting is basically someone trying to say, like, no pain.
Yes. There must be a total absence of pain, actually.
Yeah. And it's really great. And I had a question about this, and I also have a theory. So in the audio book, the PS is read by Moira Quirk in Coronabeth's voice. And if you were just reading this, you might assume this is actually Ianthe, because the only known interaction that we have of Harrow just before her lobotomy is with Ianthe. Because we know Ianthe's alive. We don't know where Corona is at that point.
Wait, you think that she's saying it in Coronabeth's voice?
I think she's saying it in Coronabeth's voice.
It's definitely Ianthe.
I think it's Corona. I do. And I think that Corona and Ianthe were able to connect before they went their separate ways back at Canaan House and before Harrow lobotomized herself. Because the PPPPS is XOXOXOXO. Mm-hmm. That's Coronabeth.
I thought of Gossip Girl, which is very Ianthe.
I think it's also Coronabeth. Anyway, we'll see. Maybe. But
should we start making bets?
Ooh, yeah. What do you want to bet?
I bet that this is Ianthe.
No, I bet this is Coronabeth, but a bet means that you have to bet something.
I don't know. I'll give you $20. I'll Venmo you.
Well, if I win, I think you have to do a full body skeleton paint job down yourself for the kickoff of Nona.
Okay, sick. All right, deal.
Great. We just got real sidetracked.
Okay. There's also a very funny moment here where Camilla teaches Harrow how to hold her sword better.
Yeah, it's cute.
But Judith is making a real fuss even though her mouth is fused shut. And Harrow, out of curiosity, unfuses the mouth for like a hot second. And Judith is like, "Whoa, there's a traitor. They're already infiltrated." And then Coronabeth puts her hand over Judith's mouth. So Harrow doesn't hear all of it, but I assume she's referring to Mercy.
She's definitely referring to Mercy, right? Which then confirms that Mercy visited BOE before this moment. And also kind of confirms that Coronabeth is on the side of BOE in this moment.
Oh, yeah.
And that maybe Cam is too, because Cam doesn't do anything to stop this.
No, yeah. I mean, Camilla literally says that they're not on the same side. I think that I forget what bit this is in, but there's also something that says that BOE has been working with the sixth house for like a while. Yeah. So I'm not sure if Camilla would have had any idea of that, but they were able to demonstrate to Camilla that her own house had been working with them. I think this is in As Yet Unsent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that they're both turned to the BOE side, but I mean, I think they're still kind of prisoners.
Yeah, they've been radicalized, but there's not a lot of trust there.
Right.
But we launch into chapter 35. There is a fractured ninth house skull. And we are back in third person, which means we are back in the river bubble.
The Harrow river bubble, now that there are two river bubbles.
Oh my God, yeah, we have to make a distinction. There's two main things in this river bubble that we want to talk about. The first is around Abigail and Ortis. So essentially, Harrow walks in on Abigail and Ortis having this conversation about his sword. What's up with this?
Yeah, I was confused about this. I was like, wait, is this Matthias Nonius's sword that has been passed down? Because I think he says it's his great-grandmother's, like 10 generations back. So I feel like he's asking her basically if he can call someone back from the dead. And I can only imagine it's got to be Matthias Nonius.
I think it is, because it seems to me that when Matthias Nonius finally does get called back, they kind of like look at each other and they make it happen. When Ortis breaks out in the poetry and then Abigail does her thing. So my guess is that they're talking about this as like one strategy for how the fuck they're going to get out of this bubble.
Right.
It is a fun little Easter egg to like pick up on this after having finished the book and actually seeing Matthias Nonius coming back.
Yeah, in a similar vein, I think that this mention of the Emperor's quarters is really interesting. There are a couple of references to John's quarters, I think, throughout these books. And I am curious about it. I would never have thought about it ever. I would have just thought that he would have had his own single room somewhere. But of course he had a whole area. And so Abigail says here, I've come to believe that they, or the Emperor's quarters, run sidelong to the facility rather than ... So she's obviously thinking about it and she thinks it's important. So this is just our biggest hint. It doesn't even really tell us anything, but I do think it's interesting.
It is interesting, and I would guess that we're going to circle back. There's something fishy going on, John.
Yeah, and speaking of fishy, we get a little bit more info on the weather, and it's bleak. It is cursed. This weather yucky. Is bad times. It's become like sleety and then icy, and there are all of these organic tubes with little things swimming in them. When I read it, I was like, oh, they're like little fallopian tubes with little sperms swimming through them. I'm sorry, but that's just, I was like, oh, because awake.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, you know what? Now that you say that, sure. It's absolutely ghastly, bordering on shitty, I think, according to Dulcinea Septimus, who, by the way, is doing pretty well.
Yes.
Now that she's dead, you know?
Yeah.
There's nothing killing her.
Honestly, thriving.
Yeah, she's doing well. And then I think the biggest thing that we get out of this chapter,
oh my gosh, this is huge,
is this totally manic speech by teacher.
Unhinged.
Very unhinged. And also, when you first read this is one of those things where you're like, I have no idea what this is. But when you read it again, once you kind of understand the whole thing, you're like, oh, this is actually very clear.
Right.
This unhinged speech makes a lot of sense.
Should we just read this paragraph?
I think we should read it.
All right, buckle up, bone nerds. I believe we are now being punished for what they did. Even the devil bent for God to put a leash around her neck. And the disciples were scared. I cannot blame them. I was terrified. But when the work was done, when I was finished, and so were they, and the new lictors found out the price, they bade him kill the saltwater creature before she could do them harm. Oh, but it is a tragedy to be put in a box and laid to wait for the rest of time. It happened to me, but I was only a man, or perhaps 50 men. Reverend daughter, your whole house treads upon a knife's edge as keepers of such a zoo. What the hell? Okay, Eoval, the devil, that is Alecto.
Mm-hmm.
The saltwater creature, that's Alecto.
Mm-hmm.
Even the devil bent for God to put a leash around her neck. This whole speech is so cryptic, but so good. And then also, I think this is the biggest hint we have that Alecto is the resurrection beast, or one of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think the other one would have been when God miscounted the resurrection beasts that were left. That was pretty huge. But when he says, Reverend daughter, your whole house treads upon a knife's edge as keepers of such a zoo, he means that Alecto is all of the 10 billion souls of earth minus however many people that God decided to resurrect. Mel, it's so cool.
It's so cool. And it's given to us in this like ridiculous way.
I know. Because teacher is drinking like thistle shrub.
Yeah. I don't even know what thistle shrub is.
A shrub is like this vinegary drink that's like very, very, very low alcohol, I believe.
Is it like kombucha?
Yeah, kombucha vibes for sure.
So teacher's just sipping on some kombucha, pretending that he's wasted. Talking in tongues here.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting because when he says that it's coming for you, so he says it's coming for you, Reverend daughter. Oh, it's coming for you, and once it's got you, once that rock's rolled away, once that tomb's levered open, the emperor of the 9 houses will never know peace again. The king is dead. Long live the king. And he could be talking about Wake coming for her. He could be talking about Alecto coming for her. I think he's talking about Alecto, honestly.
Yeah, that's my gut too. I feel like I am confused by that because I feel like the way that we see Alecto, which is through Harrow's eyes, is that Alecto is quite harmless. But obviously she's not.
I think it's Alecto. Isn't it funny how many people want Harrow's body?
Oh my God.
Anyway, I mean, it's good. I think the end of this chapter is with Abigail saying, well, bugger teacher. Like, fuck him. You know, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. But they don't even know what kind of information they've been given here.
I know.
Then we move into chapter 36. This is 1 week before the Emperor's murder. Mm-hmm. We are back in the second person on the Mithraeum. And the decal here is that of a herald. And the only time we've seen this decal before, I think, is the very beginning of the book. This is a fun chapter. It's mostly Mercy Morn giving a River 301.
Oh my gosh. This is such a funny bit.
And we get some strategizing. It's funny. It's a great chapter.
Yes. But at the very beginning, it's just talking about how Harrow's sort of realizing that these are her last days. She's praying a lot. She's remembering her childhood. And also, she has this very interesting conversation with the body.
Yeah, and it's actually really sad.
I know.
Ugh, it breaks my heart. At this point, they're within the sphere of the beast, and so all the shades have been drawn down. You know, it's very dark on the ship. There's kind of this impending doom that I think everyone is feeling. This is real. We're getting closer. And one night, Harrow is in bed with the body. And the body says it's coming in her low, many-personed voice. Right then, she used the voice of your father's cavalier. It's near. I thought that was weird. What's up with that?
Right. So she says, with great anticipation, it's coming. I feel like this could refer to literally the resurrection beast. I think more likely she's referring to it's coming as in the end is coming. Like her time to be free is coming. That's how I read it. But it could also be the resurrection beast. Alternatively, it could be that Alecto, still back in the tomb on the ninth house, is sensing something approaching the ninth house. And so in a totally different area.
Oh.
Which I don't know.
Yeah.
And Harrow follows up on this by groping at the body and trying to kiss her. And the body says that she needs to go away for a while.
Oh, not what you want to hear.
I know. Absolutely brutal.
And then Harrow says, I've done you wrong. And then there was the tiniest suggestion of a furrow in that brow. And she said, how? Mm-hmm. So does the body not even know that Harrow has just tried to do this? Or like she just doesn't register it?
I think that when they talk about Alecto not being fully human, that Alecto is just really fully not human. She doesn't recognize these signals the way that a normal human would be. She's an amalgamation of 10 billion souls. That's what I thought. But at this point, she's gone. This is the last we see of the body, I think, until the very, very end. Mm-hmm. Not the very, very end, but the climax when... Anyway, we'll talk about that when we get there. But my question is, why do you think the body leaves? Why is the body leaving?
She's got to tend to something.
Yes. Seems kind of rude.
It depends on which theory is right. If she is, in fact, back on the ninth house and something is physically approaching, right, she's got to go deal with that. Mm. But if it's the resurrection beast, when you think about it, the resurrection beast would be after her, too, right, probably, I think. And so maybe she needs to leave for that reason. I don't know. This is one of those mysteries I think that will be answered in Nona for sure.
I hope so. So we move on from that with a very, very funny bit.
Oh my God. It is so funny. Talk us through it.
It's so good. I don't want to get too deep into the actual science of it, although I do want to go through the layers really quick.
But hold on. Tell us about this meme.
Okay. This meme is one of my favorite memes that appears in these books. It's this person on Facebook who asks for a van to drive her church people to an event. Yeah. Do you read this? I feel like it's not even a meme, but it was everywhere for a second. And people on Facebook are offering her help and suggestions. And every time someone offers something, she tells them why it won't work and says, next.
And next with multiple exclamation points. Part of me kind of wonders if this person wasn't the inspiration for Mercy Morn's exclamation points at the end of every sentence that she says.
Oh my gosh, I would not be surprised. I feel like Mercy Morn is a combination of this lady from this meme and Lemon Grab from Adventure Time. Have you watched Adventure Time? Oh my gosh, please, for the love of God, watch Adventure Time. I can't even explain Lemon Grab, but he's this lemon-headed dude who just screams everything and is just so high key. And I think at some point they call her Lemon Mouth Prime. And I think that's a Lemon Grab reference.
Oh, hilarious. Wow.
But Mercy Morn is the whole time explaining how the river is made up and also how they're going to fight the beast. And every time she makes a statement, she says, next.
Yep.
That's a meme.
Yep. And so I did want to make a note about the layers of the river and how Tamsyn Muir put together these words. And so essentially there are multiple layers of the river. The topmost layer is Epiroic, then we have Mesozoic, Bathyroic, Barathron, and Stoma. And so a quick note that the suffix roic means stream or river. And then the prefixes of these all refer to the layer. So epi is top, meso is middle, I think bath is deep.
Mm-hmm.
And then barathron as a word is just a gulf or a pit, which is where they put the resurrection beasts. And then the stoma is the gateway to hell. And so there are openings, I think, that when a resurrection beast gets near within the layer of the barathron, the entrance to the stoma kind of opens up, kind of like a mouth. And we see that later. But anyway, those are the different layers of the river. And the plan really is to slowly get the resurrection beast down to the bottommost layer of the river.
Good work, Mel. That's some sleuthing right there.
I do what I can. Also, I will say, when was this book published?
2020?
Okay, so there is another pop culture reference here, which builds off of the next meme, and that is, it's a resurrection beast, honey. Thank you. Next. That is an Ariana Grande lyric. Thank you. Next.
Oh my gosh.
Epic song. Anyway, that was 2019, so I don't think this is accidental, but depends on when Tamsyn Muir wrote this.
Yeah. Dude, I love it. I love it so much.
I will make a note that Ianthe tries to get on her high horse in this conversation and is like, well, have you tried this? Well, have you tried this? And they're all like, yeah, we've tried that, and this is what happened. And through that back and forth, we learn a little bit about the lictors. But I find Ianthe to be so annoying here because it reminds me of when you're at work and you've like worked somewhere for 3 years, then a new person joins and they're complaining about why it is that we do things the way we do them. They're like, why don't we just do it like this? And you're like, we've tried that and this blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like so annoying. And I feel like Ianthe's a new girl in town, just suggesting these ideas that she thinks none of them have tried. And it's like, yo, they've been around for 10,000 years. They've basically tried everything.
They've tried everything. Also, I feel like we skipped this, but we should mention it. Everyone knows this who's ever read this book. And there is also an animatic that someone made, the same person who made the We Do Bones animatic, of this bit where Mercy Morn, she draws the resurrection beast.
So funny.
And everyone tells her what they think it looks like. She's like, this is the resurrection beast. And oh my God. And Augustine's like, that's a muffin. And Ianthe's like, I see a cloud, but with a face. And Harrow's like, I see a flower. And God's like, yeah, there's something fluorescent about it. And Gideon the First says, I thought it was a snake in a bush.
And all of that is funny, but my favorite part of this is after where Mercy says, I hate you all, and I've hated you for a millennia, except you, my lord. And God says, thanks. And then Mercy goes into this really graphic description. It's so funny. Where she basically like wants to pour acid on him. And
yes, I simply want to put you in a jail and fill it up with acid.
It's so funny. We're not going to read it, but go read it. It's on page 338 of the paperback, and it's so good.
It's very good. There's also one little bit at the very end here that I think that Ianthe's like, what is the stoma? And Mercy Morn is like, Augustine, you didn't tell her what the stoma is. And they're arguing. And Augustine says, you never did take the stoma seriously, to Mercy Morn, which is why your whole damn house sucks on it like a grotesque teat. So does the stoma have something to do with siphoning?
You know, I had been wondering what that was about, but your question made me think, yeah, it must be. It's kind of hypocritical since they see themselves as like the keepers of God, basically. And
Mercy Morn, hypocritical? No.
The eighth house? Not assholes? But they're flirting with the gate to hell.
Right.
And, you know, it does kind of make sense because when the siphoning is happening and you're at risk for something being able to enter your body, some sort of demon and shit. So, like, where is that demon coming from? Must be coming from the river. So, yeah, the stoma must have something to do with eighth house siphoning. But we do learn that the stoma is at the bottom of the river and that the riverbed is studded with mouths. Ugh, more mouths.
I know.
That open at the proximity of resurrection beasts. And that God can't actually comprehend the stoma or anything beyond it.
Right.
Which is curious. I think this is going to come up in the future books, if not in Nona and in the following book.
Yeah. And in fact, moving on to chapter 37, which is Ninth House Skull continuing in second person, and it's basically Harrow telling God how she broke into the tomb. It starts with the lictors preparing for the Arby's arrival by laying ghost words on the bank of the river. But in the same vein as like, what is the stoma and what's beyond the stoma? What is the river? There's wood and plants and shit and rocks.
It's like purgatory.
Do you think that this is a thing that will ever be explained? Or is it just a liminal space?
I think it's a literal river.
Where?
In the river.
Oh my God, Mel.
I do. I think the river it's actually a river. And it's in a different dimension. But you can travel through it to get... It's like time travel. I think that's where we're going. But... yeah. Anyway, there's something wrong with the river, as Abigail had mentioned. So we're gonna get more.
I also think a lot about how often in a lot of death myth that you cross a river to get to heaven or hell or whatever. There's definitely that metaphor as well, or that parallel to our own mythology. Yeah. But that's just the very beginning of chapter 37. The biggest part of chapter 37 comes next.
Right. It's a conversation with God and Harrow. And the first part is when Harrow asks why God gets shut in his room when the resurrection beast comes. And we get a lot of information here. And essentially what God says is that if he were to die, the whole system would die.
Right. Which is true. What's not true is that God could die. God can't be touched by the heralds. We learn this at the end, that he wouldn't die. He's not afraid of them.
What does this mean?
So I actually think that the reason that God can't enter the river is that it would leave Alecto in his body. And I feel like he's afraid, actually what he's afraid of is that his lictors would recognize Alecto and be like, oh shit, she's your cavalier.
God does enter the river because they
only with his body.
Oh, he doesn't enter with his... Oh my God.
Yeah, we never actually see him enter with just his soul in a way that would leave his cavalier Alecto in his body. As far as I know.
Wouldn't even leave his cavalier in his body because his cavalier is in her body.
No, I mean, because they have perfect lictorhood.
So they can be in two places at once.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how it works, but I think that basically you get all of the advantages of lictorhood, but on both sides. And I think that it's not your consciousness piloting your body, or it's not your cavalier's consciousness, it's your cavalier's soul. So like your cavalier's consciousness could technically still be in them, and then their soul is contributing to the function of your body or something.
Yeah, I think that's a great catch.
But I'm not really sure. And then, Mel, you know how I really liked the next meme?
Yeah.
There's a horrible meme now. There's a horrible meme that shouldn't have been allowed. This one is the number one most should not have been allowed. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh my God. So God says after explaining this, so I'm shut in here, walled in really, to prevent the 9 houses becoming none house with left grief. This is from the stupid thing that at some point they were trying to figure out like what they could get Domino's to deliver. Because, there are all those options. Mm-hmm. And someone delivered none pizza with left beef. So everything was none. And then the only thing on the pizza was left beef. So on the left side of the pizza was beef.
I don't even understand this, but
I don't know how to explain it, but it's awful.
So then God says something to Harrow here after said horrible meme, where he says, my work is not yet done. I cannot behold that apocalypse, Harrow. I think you are one of the only lictors who can really and truly understand apocalypse. What does he mean by this?
I don't know. I feel like because Harrow grew up with a dying house, she saw all of her loved ones die, basically. She saw the end. She was regularly in the midst of the end of something. So I think that that's what he means.
And then Harrow asks God, who was A.L.?
Mm-hmm.
And God basically deflects with, don't you want to ask something else? Like, how's a baby made? And are you and Ianthe being safe? And Harrow's like, what the fuck?
Honestly, after that arm thing, they're not being safe.
No, but not in the way that God thinks here. But Harrow basically is like, we're not even intimate. We're not even romantic. We're not platonic. And she's like really upset by this. And then he's like, okay, sorry. Let's talk about my bodyguard.
Uh-huh.
And he basically says that Augustine and Mercy still feel badly about what they did, which is interesting. And then he says AL stood for a few things. He called her Annabelle Lee, which we talked about, I think, in a previous episode, and Annie Laurie, which is a reference actually to a song, I think. And then when he first met her, he called her First One, and that she had a real name, but no one says it anymore.
Right. And we know that that name is Alecto.
Right.
Also, Harrow asks what happened to the first house, what destroyed it. And God says that it was not much, just rising sea levels and a massive nuclear fission chain reaction. So that's probably the biggest insight we get so far into what happened.
It's funny, like I thought climate change, but now it also sounds like maybe nuclear war.
Yeah, and I do wonder if he's referring to whatever he did to destroy everything.
Right.
Then he talks about AL, and there's a couple interesting things he says. He says that anger was her besetting sin. Yeah. It also says that she was there to see what happened at Canaan House, and then that she died after that first terrible assault. So presumably a resurrection beast came and attacked the first house. And that's when everything kind of went down. And then after that, they made him take Alecto away because they knew that they were also coming for her. But then we get to the saddest part where Harrow gets destroyed. So it's interesting here. They compare it to when Harrow almost crumbles before Ianthe when she gets attacked in her bathtub by the Saint of Duty. But this time, Harrow is not granted reprieve. She does spoil her substance, it says, at the foot of God's altar. And that's because God says to her that he thinks Alecto would have liked her and that Harrow would have made a hell of a daughter and that he sometimes indulges in the thought that she had been his daughter.
Ugh.
And she dies.
She loses her shit.
Yeah.
She essentially shatters a glass and then throws her body onto it.
Right.
Does God mean this, or is he manipulating her? This guy is not a good dude. Part of me believes that he has a conscience, and the other part of me thinks of him as just a master manipulator. I
think God totally has a conscience. I think that God is actually a really good villain because I think he does really think that he's doing the right thing. And I think in some ways he was justified at the beginning for being angry that people abandon Earth. But what he's done is he's convinced himself over 10,000 years that he is the only right thing and the only right opinion. But I still think that he feels compassion and empathy and all of these things. I just think that he's also extremely manipulative and he's also extremely callous. In this moment, I really do think he's telling Harrow that he would have liked to have her as his daughter because I think he really would. I totally buy it.
He's basically like the most dangerous kind of man, one who believes that he's right and doing good, but causing so much harm.
Right.
So Harrow essentially confesses to him that she opened the locked tomb, and, you know, we're back in the theme of Harrow being gaslit. Not that God even means to, maybe, in this moment. He genuinely also believes that there's no way she could have broken into the locked tomb. I think we also get a little bit of clarity on the timeline for how and when Harrow broke into the tomb here.
Right.
She says to him, I got through all these wards. They were really hard. And then the day that I decided I was going to die, she says, and this is interesting, she says, One day when I was 10 years old, I decided to end my own life, Lord. And sometimes I think it was that which let me cross the Tombkeeper's gate, which she's actually wrong. We know that she had Gideon's blood on her hands, and that's actually what let her cross. But in this, we get the timeline that she had been working through the different wards for a while, and then eventually, after the fight with Gideon, entered through with that last blood ward.
Right.
And it's, again, another moment where as a reader, you're questioning what's real and what's not, because God is pretty sure here that this is not possible. And Harrow starts to doubt herself a little bit too, and it's confusing. We're like, what's real? What isn't real?
I will say, though, as much as Harrow is constantly reminding us that she believes that she is insane, I really, really, really believed Harrow. In this bit, there was almost no part of me that didn't believe Harrow. You know what I mean?
Right.
But maybe that's also because, like, we had other context.
Right.
And I didn't know how, but I believed it.
And then this chapter ends where God is, like, trying to comfort Harrow and touches her head. And he says, "Who the hell's been tampering with your temporal lobe?"
Turns out it's Harrow. Harrow's been tampering with her own.
Right. And Harrow essentially just runs away.
Then we enter into chapter 38, Seventh House Skull, continuing in the second person. Seventh House because this is the Cytherea under the bed incident that we've been talking about.
So many questions here. We'll talk really quickly about what happens, and then there's some questions around this. So, right, the first part of this chapter really is finding Cytherea under the bed. This is like the monster under the bed thing that we all grow up with. Harrow actually, on the second to last night before the Emperor's murder, Harrow looks under her bed and sees the missing body of Cytherea. She then goes to Ianthe, drags her to her room, and shows Ianthe Cytherea's body. And Ianthe tells her she doesn't see anything.
Right.
And then says, "Have you been sleeping?" And Harrow says, "Ianthe, for God's sake, have mercy." Which is also a funny line, just because of God and because of mercy. But Ianthe essentially leaves, and Harrow goes into the bathroom, splashes water on her face, rolls her eyes around, then goes back to look under the bed after Ianthe is gone, and Cytherea is not there anymore. And there's a big what the fuck moment. And the questions, and I've seen so many people discuss these questions on Reddit too. When did Cytherea get under the bed? Is Cytherea actually under the bed? Is Ianthe lying about not seeing Cytherea under the bed? If Ianthe's lying, why is she lying? Is it any more complicated than her just being a dick? Where the fuck does Cytherea's body go after Ianthe leaves, and how does she leave? So many questions.
Yeah, this part, I don't even know if I can answer any of this, because I feel like as soon as I think I'm going to say something, I'm like, no, but then also, you know, it could be kind of the same phenomenon as when Harrow sees the body. Like, she's kind of being haunted by the body. She's also haunted by Wake, who's now in Cytherea. So maybe that's like some sort of manifestation. But I think it's got to be the real body. But if that's the case, why the fuck is Ianthe pretending that she can't see it?
That's the question. I think I am pretty clear that Cytherea is physically there. Cytherea's body is physically there.
Right.
Why is Ianthe lying? What the fuck is she up to? Why would she lie? Was it a game time decision just to, like, make Harrow question herself and keep her further under her control? There's no way Ianthe would know about Wake.
Right. That's what I don't understand. I feel like even if Ianthe wanted to be a dick, I feel like if I were Ianthe and there was a dead woman under Harrow's bed, that would be cause for concern for me. I would be like, oh shit.
Right.
You know? So I don't understand why Ianthe would try and pretend she couldn't see it unless she really just thought that it was only interested in Harrow.
Right. There's a line in Epiparodos, which we'll get to in a bit, where I think Ianthe says something like Ianthe has the personality that when she loses control, she gets back on that horse and regains control. Right. And I feel like it could be that this was a surprise to Ianthe, but she made an intentional decision to gaslight Harrow here so that she could gather herself and figure her shit out on her own.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. What is Ianthe up to? That's the question of this whole book.
Well, we can't really answer any of these questions, but maybe we'll get more insight in the next two books. But this chapter does finish up with the Saint of Duty predictably trying to kill a Harrow a final time before the end. But it's interesting here because Harrow's basically like, why are you trying to kill me? I'm gonna die tomorrow.
Harrow's like, I'm not a liability. And the Saint of Duty's like, you're wrong. You're still a liability. And then he says, don't go to the river. End it yourself before they breach. Cut off your oxygen or however you like so you don't suffer. Which, by the way, I find funny because Wake's the next person in line that inherits her like command posts.
The leader of BOE.
The leader of BOE's name is We Suffer. So right. I don't know. I just think this is funny. But Harrow says, why do you care if I suffer? And Gideon the First says, because I was the one who failed you. I pulled too many punches. Sorry, this wasn't my idea.
What does that mean? And Harrow's like, what? Whose idea was it?
Yeah.
And there's a very funny bit at the very end here where she storms off. It's like, you were very angry. And then the narrator says, you were always such a little bitch when you were angry. You know who that is? That's Gideon.
That's Gideon.
That's Gideon right there.
I imagine that, I don't know who the Saint of Duty is talking to here. If he's talking to Harrow and he really doesn't want Harrow to suffer, or if he doesn't want Wake to suffer. Or both. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I also wonder if the Saint of Duty is actually a better person, honestly, than anyone else on the Mithram besides Harrow, and actually thinks that she'll... But then he also wants her sword, so he does know something about Wake. It's very confusing.
Well, and he, you know, Pyrrha put their hand on Harrow and was like, I know you're in there. So there's something here. I mean, I think liability because Wake is in Harrow. But I think not wanting Harrow to suffer could be both Harrow and Wake. I do think that his apology here is to Harrow.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's always going to be a little confusing when you have a few souls in your body. But anyway, Harrow is frustrated without having answers. We're frustrated because we don't have answers.
Poor Harrow.
But we gallantly move into chapter 39. There is a herald decal again. We are continuing in the second person. Very short chapter. Essentially, the heralds arrive, and Augustine confirms this over the comms. There is a really great description of the fear that grips Harrow. We won't read through it, but I think that the exercise of trying to think through, like, how does one describe the fear that you feel is really well done here.
It is really, really good.
And Harrow pushes through that fear and then says to God, oh, like, is that all? And God's like, no, it's going to happen basically from here on out. And then the chapter ends with, and you walk to your death like a lover.
Yeah, it's very short.
It's very short. And this is the last chapter of the book that we read from Harrow's perspective through Gideon, second person narration.
Right.
In the present day living universe. So in the realm outside the river, this is the last that we get of Harrow's perspective, which is sad.
Yeah, it is. But it is cool because what we know is that when Harrow next opens her eyes, it's actually not Harrow at all. It's Gideon. So this is the last bit where we don't have Gideon, really. Because also, I mean, we're going to have the Epiparodos, but starting with Act 5 with the alternate universe sprint, going forward, everything comes clear. And in fact, I think this is the last chapter where there aren't really many explanations, because with the Epiparodos, we basically get a huge question answered.
Oh my God.
Which is, what the fuck is up with Harrow?
Right. And the Epiparodos is really fun because it's told from Ianthe's perspective. And
yes.
So until this point, we've only had Harrow's perspective and Gideon's perspective. And we just learn things about everyone else through conversations and experiences that they have with those people. But here we get Ianthe, which is really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Epiparodos takes us back in time 9 months and 29 days before the emperor's murder. And so at first, we enter with Harrow essentially speaking to Ianthe. And Harrow is giving Ianthe 2 notes that are intended for her.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, they're only to be opened in the event of my death or of the other happenstance, though I have very little hope of you not opening them in the moment my back is turned.
That's if Gideon shows up.
Yep.
Yes, it's got to be.
And then she explains that these notes are written in a code that only she can break, which we do know already. I think that's shared when Harrow does wake up from the lobotomy.
Mm-hmm.
She rewrites this code.
Mm-hmm. Wait, have we said what this chapter is actually about, though? Have we been skirting around what actually happens?
I didn't give the summary. No.
So what happens is that basically, this is Ianthe's perspective. She is helping Harrow give herself a lobotomy to erase Gideon's memory.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens.
And preserve Gideon's soul.
Exactly. Which I don't think that Ianthe really understands at this point, but I think she does come to understand it later.
I think she suspects that something's up, that this has to be more than grief.
Mm-hmm.
But hold on, real quick receipt here of Ianthe having the hots for Harrow. There's a very detailed description of Harrow's face, and in particular, the top lip was softly curved, as though the painter had not been able to help embellishing where they thought nobody would notice. The arch of that philtrum was close to a poem. The cheek was unreasonably smooth.
Oh my gosh. I mean, Ianthe literally says later, too, that she's going to marry this girl.
Yeah. In this conversation, Ianthe's really trying to understand why and what Harrow's actually doing. And she essentially begs Harrow to tell her what she's, what she's up to.
Right. And she's also like, I would prefer not to do this. I feel like you're going to turn yourself into a vegetable.
Mm-hmm. And then Harrow goes on to explain, why she's enlisted Ianthe to help her with, quote unquote, the work.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a really funny back and forth here where Harrow's like, you're a genius, but that's not why I'm asking you. And it pretty much sounds like you have no respect for the actual theory of necromancy. Mm-hmm. You kind of just want to show off. Mm-hmm. And then she says that Ianthe isn't Sextus's caliber. And Ianthe says, no, but Sextus' head exploded, proving the world that he hasn't accounted for everything. Which is wrong. Sextus has straight up accounted for everything, as we...
Yeah, because he found death inconvenient.
Yeah. But I think the interesting thing here is that there's burn after burn on how little Harrow thinks of Ianthe.
Right, but I think that the reason that she chose Ianthe to help her with this process is not because she thinks that Ianthe is really good at necromancy, even though she is. Harrow says, I asked you because you know what it is to be fractured, which is brutal. I assume she's referring to Corona.
Yeah. I mean, she can't possibly be referring to Nibirius.
Yeah. Of such banality was grief made.
And Ianthe's basically like, just admit that you're running away from something. Mm-hmm. And running away is for fools and children. And she says, you're a lictor. You've paid the price. Hardest part is over. You answer to nobody now. And Harrow responds and says, if you think that you and I are not more beholden than ever, you are an idiot.
Which is so true.
It's so true. And of course Harrow knows this. Harrow was created because of this mass genocide, and her life's work has been trying to do right in the best way that she can by these murdered children that made her her. And Harrow's not like, oh, well, oops, it happened. I'll just live my life. She's like, no, these people died for me, and I'm going to make the most of my life in their honor. And Ianthe does not think this way.
Right. I think there's a really interesting line here where Harrow gets really frustrated with Ianthe sort of hesitating and says, there's still time and you thieve it from me. And I feel like this could just mean there's still time to preserve the soul, but I feel like it might also refer to there's still time to do the perfect lictoral process, and that Ianthe is thieving that from her. It can't just be that, or maybe it is, but I feel like there's a little bit something more here than it might seem on first read.
Yeah, there's also, I think, maybe the only reference to Harrow's eyes being different than black here. When she opens them, there's one black eye and she has one gold eye. And so we have evidence that Gideon really is in Harrow right now, but it's not fully done. And so there's still time. I kind of thought that there's still time and you thieve it from me is about how the longer they wait, the more Gideon's soul is going to go away, or like the more that Harrow will have achieved the kind of lictorhood that Ianthe has, and that Harrow's trying to stop that. And I think that's maybe what it means. But
yeah, you're probably right.
Either way, Ianthe agrees to do this thing and then sits. Harrow doesn't allow her to witness the lobotomy, so she can't actually see what Harrow's doing. And then once Harrow is done, Ianthe starts like feeling Harrow's head while she's asleep and is trying to like figure out what she's done. And this is where that hair thing comes in.
Oh yeah,
that we talked
she'll
about.
Always have to have haircuts.
Yeah,
this is also the bit where she says, "Someday I'll marry that girl. It might be good for her. Probably not though."
And then Ianthe the First went to see A Man About a Queen, which has been the focus of so many theories and speculation.
Well, I think it is Corona Beth, but also apparently, according to something or someone I saw online, it also is a reference to masturbation. So
why? Wait, how? Tell me.
I have no source material for this. I will have to find it.
Oh, I think I did look this up. Oh, right. Yeah. I did look this up.
But I think it might be a funny thing that Tamsyn is doing, but I also think it actually means she's seen God about Corona Beth.
Yeah, I think this is clearly about Corona Beth. Nona spoiler, they refer to Corona Beth in Nona as crown, which implies some sort of queen situation. But we shall see. The countdown has arrived.
I'm feeling it. I am feeling it every second that I edit this podcast.
It's coming. I must go away for a while.
It's near.
That's what I'm going to tell my partner when Nona is published. I must go away for a while.
Yes. That's so good. We should wrap it up here, though. This is a chunky bit. Yeah. But next episode is going to be sick because it's the alternate universe merry-go-round and more. It's coming. It's near.
All you fanfic fans, the next episode is for you.
It's true. This is where we really see Tamsyn Muir's background. But thanks so much for joining us. If you liked listening, please rate and review us. If you have questions or comments or want to point something out that we have missed, send us a question on our website, locktoonpod.com, or on Twitter at locktoonpod. We release episodes on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, or sometimes even Thursdays, Fridays. We've done a couple of times, wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks as always to Olivia Kay for our theme music. I am Amy.
And I'm Mel.
And we'll see you next time here at the Locktoon Podcast.